There was a lesson that shaped millions of Generation X children. The strange part is, no one ever sat them down to teach it. It wasn't written in a parenting book. It wasn't a family rule. It wasn't even spoken out loud. Life taught it instead. One ordinary afternoon at a time. Maybe you remember coming home from school with a house key hanging around your neck. You unlocked the front door, stepped into a quiet house, dropped your backpack beside the couch, and for a moment, the loudest sound in the room was the television. No one asked how your day went. No one asked if something happened at school. No one noticed the look on your face. So you made yourself a snack, finished your homework, watched cartoons, and waited for someone to come home. Back then, it didn't feel lonely. It felt normal. That's the strange thing about childhood. You don't question the world you're born into. You simply assume, this is how life works. Years later, people would describe Generation X with words like independent, resilient, self-sufficient, the generation that didn't need constant supervision, the kids who disappeared on their bikes all afternoon, and somehow always made it home before the streetlights came on. Those descriptions aren't wrong. Generation X really did become incredibly independent, but they may not tell the whole story. Because independence isn't always something a child chooses. Sometimes it's something a child practices again and again until it no longer feels like practice. It feels like personality. Think back for a moment. Do you remember the first time something went wrong and you decided not to tell anyone? Maybe another kid embarrassed you in class. Maybe you failed a math test. Maybe you fell off your bike and walked home with blood running down your knee. You cleaned yourself up, said nothing. And by dinner, life had already moved on. None of those moments seemed important. But childhood isn't built by extraordinary moments. It's built by ordinary ones. A forgotten lunch, a broken bicycle chain, a science project nobody could help you finish, a nightmare you never mentioned, a bad day you kept to yourself. One memory doesn't change a child. Thousands of tiny memories do. Psychologists have learned something fascinating about the way children grow. Children don't only learn from what adults tell them, they learn from what repeatedly happens around them. Every single day, their brain is collecting evidence, quietly asking one question. What kind of world do I live in? If someone comforts you every time you're frightened, you learn comfort is available. If someone listens every time you're overwhelmed, you learn your feelings matter. But if every difficult situation ends the same way, you begin learning something else. Not because anyone planned it, simply because that's what keeps happening. Imagine you're 10 years old. You forgot your homework. No one can bring it to school, so you accept the bad grade. A few weeks later, your bicycle chain slips off. You spend an hour getting grease all over your hands until you finally fix it yourself. Months later, your best friend suddenly stops talking to you. You sit alone in your bedroom, trying to understand what happened. You don't tell anyone. Eventually, the feeling fades. Life keeps moving. Each moment seems small, but your brain isn't measuring how painful each experience was. It's looking for patterns. And slowly, a pattern begins to appear. When something goes wrong, I handle it. The first time, that's adaptation. The 10th time, it's habit. The 100th time, it becomes expectation. That's where many people misunderstand Generation X. When they see adults who rarely complain, adults who stay calm under pressure, adults who solve everyone's problems, where they assume those people were simply born strong, maybe. But maybe strength isn't the whole story. Maybe what looks like confidence started as necessity, because the child who keeps solving problems alone eventually stops expecting anyone else to solve them. And after enough years, something even quieter happens. They stop asking, not because they don't need help, because asking no longer feels like part of the equation. That's how childhood works. It rarely changes us all at once. It changes us one ordinary afternoon at a time. And before we even notice, the child who learned to carry every small problem alone becomes the adult who believes they should carry every big one too. That child grows up, they get a job, build a family, pay their bills, become the dependable one, the person everyone calls when something falls apart, the one who always seems calm, always prepared, always in control. From the outside, they look incredibly strong, and they are. But strength can be deceptive because the strongest looking people are often carrying the heaviest weight, not because life has been harder for them, but because somewhere along the way, they stopped believing that weight was ever meant to be shared. Listen carefully to the language many Gen X adults still use today. I've got it. Don't worry about me. I'll figure it out. I'm fine. Those words sound confident. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're echoes of childhood, not decisions made yesterday, habits built decades ago. Psychologists have long understood that childhood doesn't only shape memories, it shapes expectations, especially expectations about other people. If every difficult moment taught you someone would eventually help, you grow up believing support exists. But if every difficult moment ended with you solving it alone, you grow up believing that's simply how life works. Responsibility itself isn't the problem. Every child benefits from learning responsibility. The problem begins when responsibility quietly turns into emotional isolation, when needing someone starts feeling uncomfortable, when asking for help feels almost embarrassing. Not because anyone told you it was weak, because it became unfamiliar. Think about the last time someone sincerely asked, "Are you okay?" How quickly did you answer, "I'm fine"? Did you even stop to think before saying it? For many people, that answer arrives automatically, almost like muscle memory, because for years, no one expected you to explain how you felt, so eventually then you stopped expecting it too. That's why many Generation X adults become the people everyone depends on. They're the coworker who stays late without complaining, the friend who always answers the phone, the neighbor who shows up first when someone needs help, the parent who keeps everything together. They're incredibly reliable, but reliability often hides something nobody else can see. Exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, the kind that comes from believing every problem belongs on your shoulders, the kind that whispers, "Don't bother anyone," even when you're overwhelmed, even when you're scared, even when you're carrying more than anyone should carry alone. And here's the irony. Many of the people who struggle the most to ask for help would never hesitate to help someone else. They'll drive across town to help a friend move. They'll sit beside someone in a hospital waiting room. They'll drop everything for the people they love. But when they need the same kindness, they quietly convince themselves they'll be a burden. Where does that belief come from? Rarely from one dramatic event. More often, from hundreds of ordinary afternoons, ordinary disappointments, ordinary silence. Childhood has a remarkable ability to turn repeated experiences into lifelong beliefs. Not because children are fragile, because children are constantly adapting. That's how they survive. The child who says, "I'll handle it," usually isn't trying to be brave. They're trying to make sense of the world they're living in. And if that strategy keeps working, the brain keeps using it. Long after childhood is over, long after the empty house is gone, long after the key around your neck disappears, the adaptation remains. This doesn't mean Generation X was broken. Far from it. Many became remarkably capable adults, resilient, resourceful, calm under pressure. Those are real strengths. They deserve to be celebrated. But every strength has a shadow. Sometimes resilience becomes emotional distance. Sometimes self-reliance becomes self-isolation. Sometimes being the strong one becomes so familiar, you forget you're allowed to be human too. Maybe that's the real legacy of those quiet afternoons. Not that they created weak children, they created strong ones. Children who learned to solve problems, children who learned responsibility, children who learned how to keep going. But perhaps they also created adults who forgot that strength and vulnerability were never supposed to compete with each other. Real strength isn't proving you can carry everything alone. Real strength is knowing when you no longer have to. Maybe that's the lesson many Generation X adults are finally learning. Not that their independence was a mistake, but that it doesn't have to be a prison, because the child who once whispered, "I'll figure it out," did exactly what they needed to survive. They deserve compassion for that. But survival was never meant to become a permanent way of living. At some point, surviving has to become living, and living was never designed to be a one-person job. So if this story feels less like a documentary and more like a memory, maybe it's because some part of that child is still quietly carrying the weight. Not because they have to anymore, but because no one ever told them. It's okay to set it down. If one childhood memory came back while you were watching this, I'd love to hear it, because sometimes the smallest memories explain the biggest parts of who we become.